In the opening scene of the movie, we see a family moving into a new neighborhood in a car. The family consists of our main character, Megan, her younger sister Lily, and her parents. Meg's father is about to separate from her mother, Diane, and he is only there to drop them off. After dropping them off, he drives away in his blue car as Meg watches him go through the window of their new house. The next morning, we see Meg attending her English literature class in her high school. Meg is an attractive 18-year-old high school senior at a high school in Dayton, Ohio. After her father abandoned the family, Meg had to face financial and mental issues. She uses writing poems as a medium to channel out her emotions, hoping to feel a little lighter. When she is asked to read a poem in the classroom, she reads out the poem titled Blue Car. She wrote this poem after her father left the family behind. The English teacher, Mr. Oster, is impressed by her poem and realizes that she has genuine talent. Mr. Oster then announces that a poetry writing competition is around the corner and interested students can give their names to him. He also adds that the final round of the contest will be held in Florida during the spring break, and the winner can win $3,000 as prize money. Then we see Meg babysitting her younger sister Lily at home. Her mother Diane comes home later after working extra hours at a primary school. Thus, Meg has to take care of Lily and the house in her absence. She prepares dinner and helps Lily with her homework. Diane finally returns home, and from the interaction between the mother and daughter, it is clear that they don't seem to get along well. After her father abandoned them, Lily's health has been getting bad too, and she usually stays upset most of the time. At Meg's high school the next morning, Mr. Oster hands out the papers of a test he took recently. When Meg checks the answer sheet, she finds an application form. Upon checking it, she realized that it was for the poem competition Mr. Oster told the class about the previous day. She wasn't planning to join the competition initially, but she decided to give it a thought now. Participate after classes get over. Mr. Oster notices Meg walking home on her own. He stops his car next to her and offers her a lift. Before dropping her off at her house, Mr. Oster asks about Meg's family. He also reminds her that she should take part in the coming poetry competition and start practicing for it too. He lets her know that he is willing to help her practice for the competition if she seeks any help. With this, Mr. Oster drives away. The next day on the school bus, Meg tells her friend Georgia about Mr. Oster giving her a ride the previous day. When the poem competition is mentioned, Georgia tells Meg that Mr. Oster once won a similar competition, and he probably sees talent in Meg. She also adds that the book he carries with him all the time is his novel. Georgia reveals that Mr. Oster is an old friend of her father, and she knows all this from him. Then we see Meg meeting Mr. Oster at his office to submit the application form for the competition. Mr. Oster is happy with Meg's decision to join the competition. He accepts the application form and proceeds to explain to Meg about poetry. Meg finds Mr. Oster's love for poetry inspiring and listens to him closely. At home, Meg is trying to write a new poem while taking care of her sister in the meantime. She is affected by Mr. Oster's words as she tries to explain to Lily about poetry, as Mr. Oster did to her before going to bed. Over the next few days, we see Meg with Mr. Oster during the lunch breaks at school. Mr. Oster, posing as her mentor, acts as an inspirational figure by discussing poetry and literature with Meg in between their practice sessions. Sometimes, he also reads off some lines from his novel, and Meg finds it attractive and admirable. The day before the competition at her school, Meg asks her mother during dinner to come to her school the next day to attend the event. Diane tells Meg that she won't be able to make it as she has an important job interview that day. She can't miss the interview, as if she gets that job, their financial burden will decrease considerably. Meg narrates her poem in the competition the next day at school. She wins the school competition, and now she has to attend the final round to be held in Florida. Meg is happy to win the competition and meets Mr. Oster after the competition. The two have grown closer over time and are quite comfortable around each other. Mr. Oster congratulates her and tells her to get ready to go to Florida. He even tells her that he can help her with the money if her family finds it difficult. Meg refuses his offer and tells him that she'll arrange it herself. Later, we see Meg asking her mother for money to go to Florida for the final round of the competition. Diane tells Meg she won't be able to afford it, as she didn't get the job she was interviewed for the day before. Meg becomes disappointed by this and tries to think of other ways to arrange the money. We then see that Meg's younger sister's health has gotten worse. She refuses to eat and is disturbed after their parents break up. Diane decides to admit Lily to a hospital to improve her health. This makes Meg worried and sad. She tells Mr. Oster about this, and Mr. Oster comforts her by embracing her warmly. The financial condition of her family gets even worse after Lily's condition. Finding no other option, Meg decides to steal from the store where she works as a part-timer. Even though she successfully stole some stuff without getting caught, she is not able to sell them to get some money in return. Thus, her plan to earn some money by stealing from her workplace fails. Another bad news hits the already miserable family of Meg when her mother gets a call from the hospital one night. Lily jumped off a window in the hospital and ended herself in the process. This leaves both mother and daughter sad and more miserable. Then we see Meg visiting her workplace to continue her work. But to her surprise, the owner somehow learned that she had stolen from the store. She is asked to leave as the owner fires her from the job. When Diane learns about this, she gets angry with Meg and in a fit of rage pushes her out of the house. After all this, Meg goes to meet Mr. Oster, hoping to seek some comfort. Mr. Oster makes her sit calmly and tries to make her feel better with his words. He tells her that her mother is growing through a lot because of her younger sister's sudden demise. He advises Meg to stay somewhere else in the meantime and not return home to let her mother calm down. Following Mr. Oster's advice, Meg stays at George's house for the next few days. Meanwhile, the day of the final round of the poem competition was arriving soon. She thinks of another plan to get some money to arrange her trip to Florida. She decides to steal again. But this time, she breaks into her own house and steals some of her mother's jewelry. From the money she gets by selling them, she gets herself a bus ticket to Florida. When she arrives in Florida, she has to sleep the night on the beach, as she has no money to get herself a hotel room. The next morning, Meg sees Mr. Oster with his wife Delia and son relaxing on the beach. She walks up to the family to drop a hello, but Mr. Oster welcomes her to sit with them, and they all have a small talk. After a while, we see Mr. Oster and Meg walking away from Delia along the beach. After walking for a distance, they sit by the ocean to have a conversation. Mr. Oster suddenly leans in for a smoosh, and Meg joins in. Later that night, we see Mr. Oster and Meg together in a hotel room. The two have a moment together, even though Meg seemed a little confused. After some time, when Mr. Oster leaves for the bathroom, Meg checks his novel lying nearby. To her surprise, the notebook was empty and it was only filled with random doodles and notes. She finally realizes that Mr. Oster has been putting up a show all this time, only to impress her and reach his ultimate goal. She is disgusted by Mr. Oster and regrets her ignorance. The next day, in the final round of the competition, Meg leaves her poem Blue Car behind and narrates another poem on the stage. The words of this poem were the replies to Mr. Oster's betrayal and the sick act of weakness. Mr. Oster and his wife were also present in the audience, and it didn't take long for them to understand the message Meg was trying to convey through that poem. Meg loses the competition, but she doesn't care anymore. She goes back to her home and waits for her mother to return. She also calls her father to ask if she can stay with him from now on. When her mother returns home in the evening, the two have heartfelt moments together as she apologizes for her actions. Both mother and daughter reconcile with each other, and Diane allows her to go stay with her father. The movie ends with Meg's father taking her away in his blue car.